The sun scorched the pavement outside Luxury Motors, making the rows of gleaming cars look like jewels under a magnifying glass. A modest SUV pulled quietly into the rear of the lot, unnoticed among the Bentleys and Maseratis lined out front. The driver, a tall figure clad in a faded gray hoodie, worn jeans, and scuffed sneakers. At a glance, he was just another casual visitor, maybe curious, maybe just killing time. But behind the tinted windows of his simple ride sat a man who needed no introduction to the world. Today, however, Snoop Dogg wasn't here as a superstar. He wasn't here as a mogul. He was here for something far more important: the truth. Snoop had recently acquired Luxury Motors, the most prestigious dealership in the bustling city of Sunville. But ownership on paper wasn't enough. He wanted to feel its heartbeat when no one knew the boss was in the room. He wanted to see the real face of the empire he now led. With a quiet breath, he stepped out into the searing afternoon air. No fanfare, no entourage, just a man on a mission. The dealership's sleek glass facade shimmered under the sunlight, almost daring him to step inside. Through the glass doors, he could hear the faint hum of conversation and laughter. Staff members lounged casually near. The front desk, unaware they were about to be tested in ways they never imagined. He pulled the hood of his sweatshirt up a little higher, not to hide, but to blend. Every step toward the entrance felt like tightening a string. Would they see him as a valued guest, or would they see only what they wanted to see? As he opened the door, a blast of cool, conditioned air washed over him, carrying with it the rich scent of fresh leather and polished chrome. Rows of pristine vehicles stretched out before him, their glossy finishes catching the light like a promise. Inside, the energy shifted. The idle chatter faltered. Eyes flicked toward him, curious, assessing, not hostile, not yet, but guarded. Snoop felt it immediately. That subtle wall that goes up when someone decides who you are before you've said a single word. He didn't flinch. He didn't scowl. He simply moved forward, hands tucked loosely in his pockets. His posture relaxed, but his senses razor-sharp. And then, from across the gleaming floor, she appeared. Elena, manager of the dealership, mid-40s, sharp eyes, sharper blazer, clipboard tucked like a sword under her arm. She walked toward him with heels clicking sharply against marble, a polite smile stretched thin across her face. A battle of perceptions was about to begin. But no one in that showroom, not Elena, not the other employees stealing glances, had any idea who they had just invited into their world. And Snoop Dogg? He was ready to let them show their true colors. Because sometimes the biggest revelations, don't come from shouting. They come from simply watching and waiting. Elena's smile tightened as she approached, clipboard hugged firmly to her chest. Her heels clipped sharply against the polished floor, each step precise, deliberate. She stopped a few feet from Snoop, giving him a once-over so swift, so practiced it almost felt rehearsed. "Excuse me," she said crisply, her voice polite but cool. "Can I help you with something?" Snoop met her gaze calmly, an easy smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Just here to take a look around," he said, gesturing casually toward the rows of gleaming cars. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, scanning him from head to toe. Gray hoodie, old jeans, scuffed sneakers. Something in her stance shifted. Subtle but there, the kind of tightening you see when someone makes a snap decision, and it isn't in your favor. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked, her tone laced with doubt despite the polished smile on her face. Snoop nodded, still smiling lightly. "Something like that." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well," she began, her words measured, "we cater to a very specific clientele here. Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification." She paused as if weighing whether to continue, then pressed on. "Perhaps I could recommend a few options. That might better fit." Before she could finish, a voice called out from across the showroom, "Hey Elena, the delivery guy's here." She flicked a glance over her shoulder, momentarily distracted, but then her eyes snapped back to Snoop, sharp and wary, like she was afraid he might wander off and do something. Snoop raised an eyebrow, his voice still relaxed as he said, "You're assuming I'm not qualified?" The question hung in the air, soft but heavy. It caught her off guard for half a heartbeat, a flicker of discomfort flashing across her face. But she recovered quickly, straightening her posture. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she said with a brittle smile. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to—" Snoop didn't flinch, he didn't even frown. He simply let her words hang there, heavy with assumption, soaking into the shiny air of the showroom. He turned casually, letting his gaze drift across the cars, pretending to admire a sleek silver coupe with an aggressive, angular design. He ran a finger lightly along the curve of its door handle, almost absent-mindedly. "Nice car," he said, his voice even, his words simple. Elena stepped forward, her smile strained tighter. "It is," she replied, a touch too brightly. "Perhaps, when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment." There it was, the line, the quiet wall built from assumptions, mortared in prejudice. "For now," she continued, her voice lowering slightly, "I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles." Snoop stepped back smoothly, slipping his hands into his pockets. No anger, no confrontation, just a quiet noting of everything happening. "All right," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Let's hear it then. What would you recommend for someone like me?" Elena blinked, startled by the directness. For the first time, her polished veneer cracked, not wide, but enough to see the tension underneath. "Maybe something a little more budget-friendly," she offered almost too quickly. "I can give you directions to a dealership that specializes in pre-owned vehicles." Snoop smiled faintly, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had seen enough. "That's quite the assumption," he said softly. His words slipped between them like a blade wrapped in silk, cutting, but without aggression. For a brief moment, Elena faltered, mouth opening then closing. Then she straightened her shoulders again, clipboard clutched like a shield. "I'll be back with a list of options," she said briskly, turning on her heel. Snoop watched her walk away, his expression unreadable. He turned back to the silver coupe, catching his reflection in the car's flawless surface. A man who, in their eyes, had already been categorized, dismissed. This was going to be an interesting day. Minutes passed. The ambient noise of the showroom slowly resumed. Conversations restarted, laughter cautiously bubbling back to life. But Snoop could feel it. The glances, the murmurs, the silent weight of being judged before even being known. He stood in the center of the room, hands in his pockets, calm as stone. He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was watching, learning. Elena returned, her steps brisk, her clipboard clutched, even tighter now, like armor. "All right," she said, stopping in front of him and offering a thin smile. "I've compiled a few options that might be more suitable for your situation." Snoop raised an eyebrow slightly. "My situation?" he echoed. "Yes," she said, nodding tightly. She handed him a printout, a list of pre-owned vehicles, used sedan. Older model, SUV compact hybrid, all reliable, all practical, all painfully modest compared to the glittering showpieces displayed behind her. Snoop accepted the list silently, scanning the page quickly before folding it and slipping it into his pocket. "Appreciate the effort," he said, voice smooth, giving nothing away. For a moment, Elena seemed momentarily disarmed, surprised by his calm. But then she reset herself, hands settling on her hips, her stance defensive once again. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping as if she were sharing a secret just between them. "I'm just trying to be realistic with you. Luxury Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Snoop met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your target customer?" Elena hesitated, just for a blink, but long enough for the truth to show on her face. "I've been doing this a long time," she said carefully. "I can tell when someone's out of their depth." "Out of their depth," Snoop repeated as if tasting the words. There was a flicker of uncertainty in Elena's eyes, but she pressed on anyway, doubling down on the very assumptions she'd never questioned. "I'm just being honest," she said. "It's better to be upfront than to have someone leave disappointed." Snoop let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "Honest, huh?" he mused aloud. "I like honesty." He stepped a little closer, just enough to make the air between them feel charged. "How about this?" he said, voice light but firm. "You let me speak to the owner. Think we can make that happen?" Elena's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, real confusion crossed her face. "The owner?" she repeated, almost laughing. "That's not possible today. The owner doesn't just drop by." "I'm sure they're busy," Snoop said, nodding thoughtfully. "But maybe you could give them a call. Let them know I'm here." Elena's smile tightened into a thin, hard line. She was losing patience, and it showed. "Look, sir," she said, her voice growing sharper. "I'm trying to be polite here, but this is getting ridiculous." She crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "If you're serious about buying a car, we can schedule a meeting. Otherwise..." "Otherwise what?" Snoop interrupted, his tone still calm but carrying a new, unmistakable edge. Elena's jaw set, her voice clipped and final. "Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words echoed through the high-ceilinged showroom, hanging heavy. In the bright, polished air, employees nearby froze mid-conversation, their attention snapping to the brewing confrontation. Snoop stood there, utterly still, calm, collected, deadly patient. Then, slowly, almost lazily, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "All right," he said, scrolling through his contacts. "I'll make the call myself." Around them, the entire showroom seemed to lean in, conversations faltering, keyboards abandoned mid-typing, even footsteps slowing to a near halt. The air was thick with something electric, something inevitable. "What are you doing?" Elena asked, voice sharper now, strained with the kind of panic that seeps through cracks she hadn't realized were there. "Just calling the owner," Snoop replied casually, scrolling through his contacts. "Shouldn't take long." Elena opened her mouth, searching for something, an objection, a justification, but no words came out. Instead, she stood frozen, clipboard pressed tight against her chest, as if it could shield her from whatever was about to happen. Snoop pressed the call button and turned slightly away, lifting the phone to his ear. "Yeah," he said into the receiver, his voice calm and even. "It's me. I'm at the dealership. Everything's fine. Just a little misunderstanding. Could you let them know I'm here?" He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket in one fluid motion. Turning back to Elena, he smiled, not smugly, but with a patience that felt almost surgical. "They'll be here shortly," he said simply. Elena blinked, twice. Her face, which had been tight with irritation, now flickered with something else entirely. Fear, confusion, doubt. The silence in the showroom stretched taut as a wire. Even the hum of the air conditioning felt deafening in the stillness. A few employees had abandoned their tasks altogether, openly watching now, whispering behind cupped hands. Who was this man? What exactly was happening? Snoop didn't move. He simply leaned casually against the nearest SUV, arms folded, as if he had all the time in the world. And then, the doors swung open. The sharp click of polished shoes echoed through the space as a man in a tailored navy suit strode in. His expression was serious, but his eyes immediately lit up when they found Snoop. "Mr. Dogg," the man said warmly, extending a hand as he approached. "So good to see you." Snoop straightened and met the handshake with a firm grip, a small, knowing smile playing at the edges of his mouth. "Thanks for coming, Vince. Appreciate it." The room collectively held its breath. Vincent, the regional director of Luxury Motors, the man who, for all intents and purposes, outranked everyone in the building, except, of course, for the one man standing beside him. Elena's clipboard slipped slightly in her hands as she stumbled forward a half step, her face draining. "Of color. Wait, Mr. Dogg?" she stammered, her voice cracking with disbelief. Vince turned to her, his professional demeanor hardening slightly. "Elena," he said sharply, I see you've already met Mr. Dogg. Elena's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. I didn't realize, I didn't know. You didn't realize, Vince cut in smoothly, that he's the new owner of this dealership. Another silence fell, this one deeper, heavier. It wasn't just the air that was thick now. It was the crushing weight of realization. Snoop turned, his gaze back to Elena, not gloating, not angry, but piercing in its quiet gravity. I trust this wasn't your ideal welcome, Vince said, his tone careful, shooting Snoop an apologetic glance. Snoop lifted a hand, stopping him gently. It's all right, Vince, he said, his voice low but steady. I think Elena and I just got off on the wrong foot. His words were generous. His tone, not so forgiving. Elena's hands trembled as she clutched the clipboard tighter, her carefully built facade crumbling piece by piece. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Snoop stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to make sure she heard every word. You didn't know what? He asked, his voice calm but with an edge so fine it could split glass. That someone like me might actually own a place like this? Her eyes widened. A flush of shame climbed her neck. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. Snoop let the silence stretch, deliberately, until it spoke louder than any words. He nodded slowly, as if accepting her silence as an answer. Then, without looking away from her, he spoke to Vince. Gather everyone, he said. I think it's time we had a little chat about how things are run around here. Within minutes, the employees filed into the dealership's sleek, glass-walled conference room, a space designed to impress clients with its minimalist luxury. Today, though, the gleaming glass and polished wood felt less like a throne room and more like a courtroom. Elena slipped into a chair near the back, her usual confident posture replaced by a nervous stillness. She looked smaller somehow, folding into herself. Snoop stood at the head of the long conference table, hands resting lightly on its edge. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone demanded the room's full attention. Vince stood near the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but watchful. Snoop let the quiet settle, heavy, expectant, before speaking. Thank you all for joining me on short notice, he began, his tone measured but carrying a weight that made everyone lean in instinctively. For those of you who don't know yet, my name is Snoop Dogg, and as of last month, I am the new owner of Luxury Motors. A ripple ran through the room, murmurs of shock, embarrassment, disbelief. A few employees cast guilty glances at each other. Elena sank even lower into her chair, her eyes fixed firmly on the conference table. I came here today dressed casually for a reason, Snoop continued. I wanted to see how this dealership operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to experience what a potential customer might feel when they walk through these doors. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like dust over the table. What I experienced today, he said, his voice softening, but sharpening. All at once it was disappointing. No anger, no shouting. Just a raw, undeniable truth laid bare for all to see. I was judged not for who I am, but for how I looked. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each person he could. And I'm not here to call anyone out individually, but we do need to talk about what this says about the culture we've built. The employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the tension palpable. This wasn't just about one bad moment. This was about a deeper rot, one that needed to be cut out if the dealership was to survive under new leadership. And Snoop Dogg? He wasn't just here to sell cars. He was, here to rebuild something far more valuable, trust. The room was still. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the silence that followed Snoop's words, and even that felt too loud. He stood calmly at the head of the table, letting the discomfort simmer. Not to punish, but to make sure they truly heard. This isn't just about me, he continued, his voice even but firm. It's about every single person who walks through those doors, every customer who doesn't fit into someone's idea of what a luxury buyer should look like? He let that thought linger, heavy and undeniable. Across the table, employees shifted in their chairs, some nodding slightly, others avoiding his gaze altogether. From the back of the room, a hand hesitantly lifted into the air. It was Chris, one of the youngest sales associates, his face pale but determined. Snoop gave him a slight nod. "Go ahead." Chris cleared his throat, speaking carefully. "Mr. Dogg, I think most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes it's hard not to make assumptions. You know, without even realizing it." Snoop's expression softened slightly, respect flickering across his face. "I get it," he said. "We all have biases, whether we like it or not." He straightened, slightly scanning the room. "But here's the thing, it's not enough to just try. It's not enough to say, well, I didn't mean to. We have to fight those biases actively. We have to create a culture where everyone, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or how they dress, feels respected." Heads around the table began to nod, some more vigorously now. "This dealership has built a reputation for excellence," Snoop said. "But excellence isn't just about the cars we sell. It's about the experience we provide." He paused, letting the silence stretch long enough to settle into every corner of the room. "And from now on," he said, his voice low but steady, "that experience will be built on 3 things: respect, inclusivity, and fairness." A ripple of acknowledgement moved through the staff. The fear and tension hadn't disappeared, but something else was taking its place now. Hope. Snoop's eyes drifted toward Elena, sitting stiffly near the back. He caught her gaze and held it. "Elena," he said, his tone neither harsh nor soft, but direct. "I want to give you the opportunity to speak." All eyes turned to her. For a long, painful moment, she said nothing, just stared at the table. But then, slowly, she rose to her feet, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake," she said, her cheeks flushed crimson. "I misjudged you. I misjudged what you could be, and for that I am truly sorry." The words hung trembling in the air. Snoop studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said. "Accountability is where change begins." He turned back to the room, his gaze sweeping over them once more. "Moving forward," he said, "we'll be rolling out new training programs, not just to teach you about the cars, but to teach us all how to treat people. Every customer deserves dignity. No exceptions." He paused, letting the words hammer into the heart of the room. "If anyone has a problem with that," he let the sentence dangle, unfinished. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was a kind of agreement stronger than any words. Snoop let a small, almost imperceptible smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "Good," he said. "Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary." He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table's edge. "Let me make one thing clear," he said, voice dipping lower, drawing everyone in. "I didn't come here today to embarrass anyone. I came here to understand the culture I inherited, and to make it better." He straightened again, turning his eyes once more to Elena. "You're an experienced manager, Elena," he said, his tone softening just slightly. "And I'm sure you've worked hard to get where you are." Elena looked up at him for the first time. Fully. No defenses, no pretense, just raw vulnerability. "But today," Snoop continued, "was a wake-up call. For you. For everyone." She swallowed hard but nodded once firmly. "I understand," she said, her voice shaking but sincere. "I was wrong, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Snoop held her gaze for a beat longer. Then he nodded. "I believe in second chances," he said simply. "But accountability comes first." He turned to the rest of the staff. "We're not just selling luxury cars here," he said. "We're building something bigger. Trust. Relationships. A reputation that isn't just about money, but about how we make people feel when they walk through those doors." The mood in the room shifted tangibly now, from anxiety to something, closer to resolve. People sat up straighter, listened more intently. Even Vince, who had been silent by the door all this time, gave a small nod of approval. Snoop smiled, a small, tight smile that spoke not just of satisfaction, but of commitment. "All right then," he said, pushing off the table and clapping his hands together once. "Let's get back to work." As the employees began to file out, murmuring among themselves, the atmosphere felt lighter, not carefree, but determined. Elena lingered by the door. She hesitated, then stepped forward. "Mr. Dogg," she said softly. He turned toward her. I want to thank you for giving me a chance to do better," she said, her voice earnest. "I won't let you down." Snoop studied her for a moment. "I hope you mean that, Elena," he said calmly. "Actions speak louder than words, but I believe people can change, if they want to." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I do," she said. Snoop watched her leave before turning to Vince. "Let's set up a meeting with the team next week," he said. "I want to make sure they know what's expected, and that we stay on course." Vince grinned, the kind of grin that spoke volumes. "You got it, boss." Snoop turned back toward the showroom, looking out at the gleaming cars under the afternoon sun. This wasn't just a dealership, not anymore. It was a place where respect would shine brighter than any chrome, and where customers, all customers, would be seen for who they truly were. And Snoop Dogg, he was ready to lead the way.